Want to know how much gold you need to be in the top 1% of the world? Well, get your slide rules out because this math is surprisingly complicated. So every now and then, the results of some study will pop up, and they'll give us the number of private owners of gold or silver. But there are a lot of problems with those numbers, of course. Now, first off, the sample population being asked is way too low to be of any use. One that made the rounds a while back stated that 10.8% of Americans held physical gold or silver. Now, if you look further into that report, well, the sample size was 1,500 people asked. So if everybody answered, 162 of them said they owned gold and or silver. And they were Americans, so the story went out that 10.8% of Americans held gold or silver. So I think we can agree here that that information is pretty loose. Before we get back to it, if you're looking for precious metals, hit up SD Bullion. New customers even get gold and silver for spot. It's sdbullion.com/new. So I'll just say what we're probably all thinking. 10.8% of Americans do not own gold or silver, and they wouldn't admit to it if they did. I ran a completely anonymous poll, and I got told off by a few commenters. There's just no way that's a typical sample. It's impossible to say how many people do. Now, what we can do, though, is step back. We can look at the overall wealth distribution in the world, and then look at how that might translate into gold ownership. Now, that would hypothetically tell us how much gold it would take to get to these various levels of wealth. So you want to know what it would take to be a millionaire if wealth was measured only in gold? Well, let's figure it out. So we could look at this country by country, but let's go crazy. Let's look at this globally, and that's actually easiest because Credit Suisse runs a report each year, and this report includes a wealth distribution pyramid. And this is important because as easy as it is to calculate the average amount of available gold that each human on Earth could have, well, that doesn't really tell us much. Does the average amount make us wealthy? Would we be poor? It's hard to say. So this diagram does a really good job demonstrating just how wild the current wealth distribution is. According to the 2022 Credit Suisse report, 47.8% of the entire global wealth is in the hands of 1.2% of the population. So anyone in this top stripe, in that top 1.2%, has more than $1 million of wealth. Now, this chart has nothing to do with money supply. This is how the $463.6 trillion in global wealth is distributed. The next 38.1% of the world's wealth is in the hands of another 11.8% of the population. So nearly 86% of the world's entire wealth is in the hands of 13% of the population. 87% of the population is left with the remaining 14% of the world's wealth. So it's not evenly distributed. I think this pyramid does a pretty good job pointing that out. Now, I don't have any kind of socioeconomic agenda to discuss with you here today. I just think this story tells itself. Now, because this is a gold channel, I figured we could ignore all that and just translate the wealth distribution into terms that might be more relevant to the topic. And that's how many ounces of gold it would take to get into that upper tier of the pyramid. So as far as we can tell, 208,874 metric tons of gold have been discovered throughout history. Now, I can't even wrap my head around tons, so if we convert it to troy ounces, we're looking at 6,715,455,039 ounces. So we can do the easy math first. We can compare that to the 7.94 billion humans alive today, and each person would have 0.85 ounces of gold. There is a big blocker here, though. Central banks, they hold about a fifth of the world's supply of gold in reserve. So once you take that out, well, each person could have about 0.7 ounces of gold. And that, of course, assumes that none was lost to industrial use and none was lost to tragic boating accidents. So before we get back to that wealth distribution chart, the part that I actually think is more interesting, having 3/4 of an ounce of gold means that you have more than the average possible amount that each living human could have. It doesn't matter if it's like 3 of those 1/4 ounce American Gold Eagles, whether it's coins, bars, jewelry, whatever, gold teeth, doesn't matter. 3/4 of an ounce of gold in any form would put you above the global average if gold was evenly distributed. As we saw in the wealth distribution pyramid, though, there's just no such thing as an even distribution. So if we looked at a similar distribution for gold ownership, making the assumption that the people at the top of the pyramid have more means to buy gold than the people at the bottom of the pyramid, well, then again, we'd see the top 1.2% would have 47.8% of the gold. Those are the millionaires. Now, the next 11.8% of the global population would have 38.1% of the gold. That's the group that would be the 100,000aires. And we're not going to go below that because I don't have the brain power for the math. So to be in that top 11.8% of the wealth pyramid, the second tier from the top, we would take 38.1% of the available 5.372 billion ounces of gold. That's 2.05 billion ounces. That would be held by 627 million humans. So ignoring the unequal distribution within that segment, each person could have 3.25 ounces of gold if we used an average. So margin of error here, call it 10%, depending on what we include, what's been wasted. So it's safe to say that if you have 3 ounces of gold, you'd be in the second wealthiest tier of this pyramid, along with 11.8% of the rest of the world. Now, if you want to be in the top 1.2%, a millionaire in conventional terms, you would take 47.8% of the available 5.372 billion ounces of gold. That's 2.57 billion ounces. If we just wanted the average amount, we would divide 2.57 billion ounces of gold by 62.5 million humans. That's the current number of people who have at least $1 million of wealth to their name. That comes out to 41.8 ounces. We're going to round that down again to 41 ounces to account for some lost gold again. So if each of the millionaires and billionaires, the top 1.2% of the population, all had an equal amount of wealth, they would each have 41 ounces of gold. Now again, that does not include what the central banks hold in reserves. Now, I could stop there, but that's really not how the world works. You heard me say millionaires or billionaires. Well, billionaires have more than millionaires. So just to get inside the Gold Millionaire Club, which would put you ahead of something like 99% of the world's population, or 6.23 billion people, well, you wouldn't need 41 ounces of gold. That's the number we came to for the average of that top 1.2%. What you would actually need would be closer to 4. That's how wild the distribution curve is. The difference between $1 million, the start of the level, and $200 billion, where the richest few people in the world live, that would be similar to the difference between 4 ounces of gold and 800,000 ounces of gold. So Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, they'd be sitting on 800,000 ounces of gold, while the first person into the group would have around 4. So there you go, 3/4 of an ounce of gold. That would put you ahead of the global average if wealth was evenly distributed, which it isn't. Some of you out there are hoarding some gold. 3 ounces of gold would put you in a good spot. You'd be in an average level for the $100,000 up to $1 million band. 4 ounces of gold, that would get you into the Gold Millionaire Club. Again, if we followed the current global wealth distribution, 800,000 ounces of gold, well, that would make you one of the wealthiest people in the world. And 41 ounces of gold, that puts you right at the average point of that top 1.2% of the population. You'd be living the dream. So I'm not throwing out any challenges to get you there. Any of these might be interesting goals for you, but everyone has different circumstances, and one goal is certainly not evenly viable for everybody. Think of this more as a fun marker for where you'd fall if the global wealth distribution was measured only in gold. So let's call it good there. My brain hurts. Let us know what you think, though, if you have any goals you're shooting for yourself, or, don't tell us anything at all if you're not really sure if this is some kind of trap. I think my last poll made a few people wonder. Don't worry, though. That wasn't the intent. Polls are anonymous. So let us know what you're up to, but only as far as you're comfortable sharing. And then while you're in the comments, be sure to hit that like button if you found any of this interesting. Be sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on if you'd like to see more on the topic. And if you're still here, thanks again for watching. I always appreciate your time. Take care.